The suffering of Palestinians caused by Zionism started in the late 19th century, which culminated in the Nakba, the massive expulsion of half of the Palestinian population in 1948, and the continued ethnic cleansing. And it's a long history of dispossession and displacement, as we both know. So this was only possible because it was condoned and supported by European countries, major European countries during the Second World War. And instead of dealing with this sort of anti-Semitism, the European accepted very quickly the Zionist movement's idea that if Europe wanted to be regarded as a new Europe, then it should completely adopt the narration of the Israeli Zionist movement.
The time the Palestinian people are facing the worst forms of Israeli occupation aggression, solidarity is much needed around the world. To see how the public opinion, mainly in the Western countries, and how the media in the West addresses the current Israeli aggression against the Palestinians, I have with me from Germany, Fateh movement spokesperson, Dr. Jammal Nazzal. Welcome to our program, Dr. Jammal.
Good to be with you, thank you.
Dr. Jammal, we know the importance of the role that media play on shaping the public opinion of any country and communicating people's message to others, this kind of communication. Now, when it comes to the Western media coverage of the Israeli aggression against the Palestinians, whether in the past or the current aggression that is escalating on a daily basis against the Palestinians, especially in Jerusalem and Jenin, from your own perspective, how do you see it?
Well, it's a well-known secret that the Western mainstream media is totally biased towards Israel. That reflects the attitude of the political level in Europe and in the Western world in general. It has been a very long-lasting problem that we have been fighting against. Luckily, though, throughout the last couple of years, alternative media have emerged. And this has offered an alternative space to the mainstream media. We see now the new generation most capable of using and benefiting from the alternative media, the social media, be it on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, or Twitter. And this gives us the space to spread our narrative, which obviously gets suffocated by the coverage of the mainstream media, which is biased towards Israel, unfortunately.
Yes, Dr. Jammal, when we see the Western media coverage of the Russian-Ukrainian crisis right now, we see how they depict, for example, the Ukraine fighters as heroes fighting for freedom and for defending their country, while when it comes to Palestine-Israel issue, they rarely talk about the rights of the Palestinian people, I mean the mainstream media. Now, why do you think the Western media is always afraid of criticizing Israel and its actions against the Palestinians?
It's actually sickening to see this bias, and it has its roots in the history of Europe. As you know, the suffering of Palestinians caused by Zionism started in the late 19th century, which culminated in the Nakba, the massive expulsion of half of the Palestinian population in 1948, and the continued ethnic cleansing. And it's a long history of dispossession and displacement, as we both know. So this was only possible because it was condoned and supported by European countries, major European countries during the Second World War. And instead of dealing with this sort of anti-Semitism, the European accepted very quickly the Zionist movement's idea that if Europe wanted to be regarded as a new Europe, then it should completely adopt the narration of the Israeli Zionist movement. So this is most unfortunate, and herein lies the very root, dear Osama, herein is the very root of the ugly pattern that allows pro-Israeli lobbies to label anyone who dares to criticize Israel as an anti-Semite. So this is absolutely bizarre. But did anyone in the Western world ever ask themselves, what does it mean to support Israel? What happens if they support Israel? Well, when they support Israel, They support a state that has thousands and thousands of political prisoners. They would support a state which has laws that discriminate against the non-Jewish population. If you support Israel, you support a state which has the practice of killing civilians, not as collateral damage, but as a policy of killing, targeting civilians. And if you support Israel, you support a state which gives Palestinians less water because they are not Jewish. Why is it okay not to criticize this? And why is it okay to support Israel doing this? Is it because the Western worlds believe in what they call the common values with Israel? What are the common values between Israel and the Western world when it comes to all these discriminations, forms of discriminations against Palestinians? It's time for the European world, for the Western world, to question their consciousness over this extremely grotesque way of mendacity when it comes to double standards against Palestinians.
Yes, back to the issue of media and its coverage of the situation in Palestine, Dr. Jammal, I mean the European and Western media in general. You talked about the social media as an alternative for mainstream media. To what extent do you think the Palestinian community in Europe and the activists who support justice and who support the Palestinians' rights, to what extent they affect the public opinion and make a change in its view of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict?
Well, if you take the last Israeli assault on Palestine in Gaza, we have seen a new phenomenon. And the secret of success lies within the mass organizing. When we brought thousands and thousands of Arab and European and American civilians on the street, we saw last year that the conversation around Palestine has shifted in a way that I personally have never seen before. And if we build on and maintain the energy, on this energy, we will do for Palestine what the global solidarity movement was able to do for South Africa within our lifetime. And we will arrive when we reach the average Joe on the American and European street, Osama. And it's the people in mass that will create that will shift the paradigm. The paradigm will shift when the people move to the street and join the demonstrations pro-Palestine. And we actually are slowly inching our way to achieving this objective.
Yes, Jamal, you're watching the situation here in occupied Palestine and the Israeli plan to commit a new massacre, mainly in the city of Jenin. We see the Israeli occupation forces aggression against children, women, youth in Bab al-Amud in Jerusalem every night after the iftar in Ramadan month. Now, we know that the media is much focused on the Russian-Ukrainian crisis, okay? Now, how would it be possible for the Palestinians living in Palestine and in the diaspora to bring the international attention back to what's happening here in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem?
You know, the key to change doesn't lie in the hand of the media itself. It
Yes.
actually lies within our own hands. The world will never pay attention to us unless we do something for ourselves, be
Sure.
it in Palestine or outside. The world will focus, the media will focus its attention on what's going on at a certain point in time in a certain place. So if you do nothing for yourself, nobody will ever do anything for you. However, this doesn't mean that we have an easy ride against fighting this bias by Western media and Western politics. Just recently, just the other day, we've listened to the Ukrainian foreign minister in Brussels telling the EU foreign ministers, Ukraine needs three things: weapons, weapons, weapons. Did you ever hear the Palestinian prime minister or the foreign minister, to that matter, asking the Europeans for weapons? We are asking the Europeans to fund our school books. And Palestine is still waiting for the European decision on that matter, which is getting delayed because allegedly they found some passages within our textbooks that are not that very much into the liking of Israel. So we are supposed to love our occupiers, whereas the Ukrainians are supposed to be funded and to be supported even militarily, to even be supported militarily to arm civilians. And when a Palestinian schoolboy throws a stone on an Israeli tank, he is labeled as a terrorist. And if you as a European support this Palestinian child, you're labeled as an anti-Semite. This is amazing, and it is sickening, and it should change.
Yeah, sure, Dr. Jammal. And my final question to you, Dr. Jammal, again about the current Israeli aggression. When we talk about occupation, we are talking about continuing aggression, but now it's very much escalating against the Palestinians. And you heard how they killed a lady in Bethlehem 2 days ago, another lady in Al Khalil in Hebron, the young boy in Jenin, and it is continuing. At the same time, building colonial settlements in Jerusalem and the West Bank, putting an end to any possibility for the two-state solution to see light. And we know, and if you go over the Western newspapers, all the governments and all the Western officials support the two-state solution and the Palestinian state in the land occupied in 1967. Now, what is required from us as Palestinians? Again, the Palestinian leadership, the Palestinian people here, and the Palestinian diaspora. How can we, again, press the Western countries to pressure the Israeli government to stop this continuing massacre against our people?
Well, you are addressing a fight on two fronts. The
Yes.
Palestinian front in the diaspora and that one back home. And the two of them have two different prerequisites and conditions. Actually, the Palestinian youth is being pushed by Israel to despair. Those young people in Jerusalem, they only want to be free. They want to live their civil life, enjoy their civil freedom, and go about their business as anybody on the earth would like to do. And Israel wouldn't like to see peace happening in Palestine. In fact, it's the Israeli army that does provoke and humiliate the Palestinian youth, pushing them literally to acts which then make it easier for Israel to kill them. That's absolutely devastating. And the world should pay attention to this. How can we focus on this in the Western world? I believe that the very existence of the Palestinian people in the diaspora can be changed into a demonstration of solidarity with Palestine. Even if you go to the street demonstrating, or if you go about your normal life, your mere physical existence is a reminder that something wrong is going on in Palestine by Israel, which simply doesn't want peace. No Israeli government since Rabin has ever wanted real peace in a sincere manner. They all want to maintain the status quo and deepen the occupation, violating the very basic human rights of Palestinians. This is what we see, and it has taken a lot of courage, especially by Western politicians, to name it as it is and to call Israel for its guilt against the Palestinians.
Yeah. Fateh movement spokesperson in Europe, Dr. Jammal Nazzal, thank you very much. It has been a great honor having you on our program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching, and from you, Osama Nazzal. Have a nice time.